Welcome. We are here today to have a talk amongst 4 artists, and they will be talking about experimental music for dance. There are 2 generations of Hawkins and Dlugoszewski collaborators here together, and we will have a conversation in particular about the collaborations that Erick Hawkins and Lucia Dlugoszewski did during the 1950s through the 1990s in creating dance that was set to Dlugoszewski's experimental music. She died, unfortunately, suddenly and without a will in April 2000, and it's taken now 22 years to look at her materials again because they have come to the Library of Congress and have joined the Erick Hawkins papers and company papers that were already here. We are going to focus today on the dance Cantilever. This is because the person here to my right, Kristina Berger and Katherine Duke, are currently restaging this dance that originally premiered in Paris in 1963. And the beneficiaries of their artistry are at George Washington University, the students there in the dance department. We also have with us Dov Manski, a pianist at the end of the table, who has had to re-examine the scores from Cantilever because Hawkins and Dlugoszewski changed this dance over time. Initially, Dlugoszewski created a score just for herself on the experimental timbre piano that she created, but then she expanded it to an ensemble. And Dov has ably met the challenge of updating the score so that he can perform it for the students. We have a guest of honor with us, David Taylor, who is to my right, and he was one of the original performers with Lucia's music for the purpose of dance. We are honored to have him here because last night he was performing Mahler's Fourth in an arrangement for his bass trombone, and he kindly agreed to come here and talk about those original collaborations. Amongst all of us, he is the one who knew Lucia for the longest time. And
that sounds awfully old, man.
Well, and she always pretended to be slightly younger, too. I should mention that Erick Hawkins was born in 1909 and Lucia was born in 1925, and it was through our collection at the Library of Congress that we could finally confirm that her curriculum vitae that said she was born in 1932 and then 1935 and 1937 were in fact cheating a little on the age and experience side. At any rate, I'd like to turn this over to them. They have a lot of expertise and perspectives to share, and this is an opportunity also to think about how saving a legacy has to be more than simply the papers that are deposited here in the Library of Congress. And I've brought some materials here which they may be referring to, but those will help us with taking a look at what was there at the time and how things have changed and what it was like to work with Lucia and Erick when they were young and creative, and what has happened in terms of how do we adapt now in the 21st century to make this artistry still seem very much alive and relevant. So perhaps we can begin by talking to Katherine Duke, who was the person who at the time of Lucia's death had to step forward very suddenly and keep the company going because when New York State finds someone has died without a will, they come in and impound everything. And Lucia had been the artistic director, and in fact she died on the eve of a premiere of a new work, which certainly put the company into chaos, as well as causing severe grief for all of the artists and her colleagues. But I want to thank Katherine for being here and to share and to give some perspectives about Cantilever, which she also danced in. And in fact, we have a picture of her, I think it's right there in front of her, where she was part of the 1988 production. So Katherine,
And that ran in the New York Times. That was Cantilever 2. And it was one of those dream moments where you go after the show and you get the New York Times for the next day, and there's your picture in the paper. It was pretty fun. But Cantilever 2 was made, Erick suffered several strokes, and we kind of, I think Cantilever, which is so cool that we're doing it, was kind of home base for Lucy and Erick in a lot of ways. So they revisited that and made it into a 12-person dance, and reworked the choreography to make it as exciting as they could in 1988. And so I think it's interesting that Cantilever, to some extent, I think it was Lucy's go-to, because I can remember her pulling me into the studio and pulling out an old version of it with the 4 dancers, because it was originally made with 4 dancers, which I was like, what is this? It was so different. And then later, when I was directing the company, I fell in love with the 4-person version, so when I was introduced to Cantilever, I had the chamber orchestra playing, and really kind of Cantilever 2, which was just much more dynamic, and then I also fell in love with the 4-person version and the timbre piano, and I was so fortunate to be introduced to Dove to be able to play for us live, because live music is the way that they believe their art needed to be presented. And it is the only way to make something really real, I feel, in the dance world. It's also really hard and delicate, and it just is a path that they forged, and I believe in firmly. So anyway, were you part, David, of the Paris? You didn't go to Paris in the premiere.
No,
Yes.
no.
So when did you?
I came around at 67, 68.
And how did you get drawn into the Lucia Dlugoszewski circle?
There was a few of us, Gerard Schwartz, Don Palmer. They were fairly advanced students, and they recommended I go down there, and I fell in love with Lucia right away. The way she wrote for my instrument it was like Muhammad Ali boxed. He could hit you going back as strong as he could hit you going forward. And that's how her writing was. It was just all through composed, but you had to forget what you are, who you are, and just get to the next page. And it was, and basically, the writing was very diatonic. And that was another thing that attracted me too, because playing with guys like Gil Evans and Duke Ellington, as opposed to more of the complicated writers, their music was written as simplistically as that. I use the word simplistic, tongue-in-cheek. The way Lucia wrote with mutes affects me to this day. In fact, last night I played Mahler with a plunger mute, and because it has a vocal effect. Not even because of the historic, fantastic guys like Tricky Sam Nanton and Quentin Butter Jackson. But Lucia handled the plunger mute in a certain way in her composition that I think it signaled the dancers that when they heard the plunger mute, they not only expected a certain kind of melodic inference, there was a time frame connected to it. She wrote it in 2 versions. One was in the 132 and one was in the 90s. And I think that triggered an emotion in the dancers, just the use of the plunger mute. She would write in a cup mute, which was another more leaning back to an improvisatory style, jazz style. I hate that word jazz, or I hate that word classical, and she did too, whether she vocalized it or not. Music is music. And so she had a cup mute that she discovered that you could make glissandi, they appear. I have to describe that.
Yes, yes,
To the
you do.
folks at home.
Yes,
you see. Right, so, she would have a way where you could use a flutter tone in the combination with the mute, that you would not have any octave changes. It would just be start to end, 2 or 3 octaves going in one continuous flow. And my feeling was that was another signal to the dancers, not just a musical signal, but the emotional signal and a time signal, you know? Then there was the bucket mute, which was a darker sound, and all of this was with the same extravagant technique. The technique was so blistering for the brass players that you really had to have a basic knowledge of the tonality and just fly with it, which is why Cantilever, the first time I heard Cantilever, was such a departure from that. Because Cantilever was, for the brass players, with more sonics in a more vertical and stationary way. She would come to certain conclusions. Oh, my God, I'm going on and on.
No,
That wasn't
no.
the question, right?
No,
What was the
what I
question?
love about
Right.
it is, well, first of all, we were just looking at these fabulous archives that are here, and there's just an entire notebook of her working on her first cantilever, which is just filled to the brim with beautiful poetry all along the way, in the moment, whoever she
You know,
was
those things were
loving.
hanging on her wall.
Always,
Index cards, the
everywhere,
whole thing
yes.
was
Yeah,
index
no.
cards on the wall.
Oh, pieces of paper, yes,
Yeah.
and someday we'll do a book of her poetry. But curious, Dove, when you now Dove, I didn't have access to this. I had the counts. Now you're talking about specificity. I mean, the dance is counted to the nth degree, and music always is. So I could give Dove, I had a cassette player, and I think I did have the score without the piano part, but I was only wanting the piano part. So he transposed what she was doing on the piano for us to do the 4-person version, which I told you I fell in love with just piano. So I was just curious what you found when you came, and he did it in like 2 days. It was amazing. I was just astonished. But I was just curious what you found when you worked on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting experience. I mean, and it's also cool to hear a little bit about what it's like to play cantilever from your perspective, like from the perspective of another instrument. You know, so I learned the piece by ear, basically, and notated it. And the first time I did it was with you and full orchestra, but there is no piano part on the score because she, as the piano player, you know, she knew her part, and so she didn't need to notate that. So
I also think she didn't want the conductor looking at her like I think she wanted to, like, I'm on my own here,
Yeah.
as she should, as the composer, just saying.
yeah, because I mean, she obviously knew it better than anybody, you know, so she didn't want anybody interfering. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's very, you know, fascinating just kind of how music is, you know, linking up with the counts and the way it's linking up with the dance movements and how specific everything is. And I guess, you know, something that you had mentioned, Dave, about it being diatonic, meaning like it's, you know, notes from one of the scales, like the major scale or whatever. You know, it's just like that combination of, you know, writing in a very like melodic way, you know, and combining that with then sounds that are like more abstract, that are more, you know, challenging for like a listener. They're just more experimental. You know, that's
Timbres, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
such
all
an
about the
interesting.
timbre, yeah. I'm just looking at this. This is the bass trombone part for cantilever, and it says, I love it, it says, play so the attack and decay is like a gong. It's glissando, beautiful unaccented PPP, double tongue, you know, or solo tone. Very, very specific. Did you encounter that a lot?
I did, but she really, I think one of the reasons I fell in love with her is because she liked me for who I was. And one doesn't encounter that at that period with a lot of the composers, the through composers who want everything mirrored exactly on the page. If you were able to give Lucia the fire or the piece within that concept, she allowed it to fly. And that went for conductors too, like between George Menahan and Joel Thome. There were times when the band would react negatively to well, bands always react negatively to conductors, you know. But like a fellow like Joel Thome, she knew perhaps his technique wasn't quite there, but she loved his poetry. And I had discussions with her about that. I said, you know, I would never be forward to say, hey, you know, you shouldn't. But I would say, hey, you realize that this is that, and this is, oh, yes, David, but his poetry is so wonderful. Or a guy like George Menahan would be exacting, you know.
And it's funny because we've had to get different players, and you've served as my musical director, and you're like, get this guy, right? Because you knew he would be more prone to play it the way Lucy wanted to. And then sometimes we would get a conductor that wanted to play it, you know, by the book, and it. When you're playing for dance, sometimes, right, Dove, that goes away. The dancers get off. We're not all perfect. I told the students that this is like they have done all the foundation and intense structural work so that it's perfect on paper, and you have the opportunity to go for that perfection in every performance, but every performance is going to be different because the musician's going to be breathing and living or thinking a little different something, and so are you in that moment and your other dancers on stage. But you have this incredible structure that brings you all together at a very high level, very detailed, to get to that. What they were after, which they talked about, is immediacy and aliveness. And that, I think, they strove for and did so elegantly in all their hard work for dance and sound and music, so that experience for the audience member, they were transported because it's just so alive. And in today's world where everything is usually done to canned music, it just isn't serving your spirit, and I think they would never want that in their work. They want their work to give you something, and that aliveness, that immediacy is their door into you as a experiencer. So when you are working with the students, what do you like to share, or what have you encountered as you, and remember now this is in mask and on Zoom, and in a matter of hours. Usually at Erick, he would tell you it's 10 years to make a dancer, and you would have to sit in the wings and play understudy, as he did with Balanchine. So this is a very different format that we have to now work in when we're trying to share this highly detailed and specific work. So I'm just, it's been interesting for me on the outside too, and I'd love to see what you share about that experience.
Indeed. Well, it has been a wild adventure indeed. So this is actually my first experience directing a work, and I have danced the 4-person version of Cantilever for, 15 years now?
Probably.
Oh, probably.
I don't keep up with, I don't know when I was born.
I'm going to start changing my date, just like Lucia, passing on the legacy. And we were originally going to set the 4-person version, which is already incredibly detailed and intense and challenging, and each dancer has their own score and their own map. So I was always, I'd go home and I have my huge stack of notebooks with all of my counts and my instructions and my own little poetry, but then to account for a whole cast of dancers who are not necessarily trained in this language, blew my mind, and I thought, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And then Katherine had the bright idea of, oh, let's not do the 4-person version, we're gonna do the 8-person version, which of course is a brilliant, beautiful challenge, and also twice as much work. And then we also found, so it's originally a cast of 4 men and 4 women. Well, we didn't have 4 male dancers to work with, so we have 8 stunning female dancers at George Washington University who don't have previous training in the Hawkins technique, but the work is so specific, it's so intense, it's so demanding, that they had no choice but to dive in, and once you go in there, there's really no way out. You're in, the Lucia and Erick abyss of beautiful poetry, but they have been nothing but stellar, and they are also, what I love is that as they are having this experience, they are also understanding that this is something they're going to take with them for the rest of their lives, whether they choose to be professional dancers or not. This is historically significant, and it truly is a language that demands intelligence in every muscle fiber of your being. I mean, you have to devote your entire self to it. The effortlessness and the fluidity that comes forth when you see the dance, because that's really what Erick is known for, is actually coming from an incredible nucleus of power from the core. So you have to be very physical in order to achieve the look of effortlessness, and to be able to pass that on to dancers who are extremely young and just at the very beginning of their careers is really new, and there's an element of danger for them, and to watch them be able to go there and with that kind of vulnerability while they're also, basically it's like, I look at it as controlled abandoned. Like you have to kind of play your chaos, you have to plan your chaos. So they have to be super skilled and technical in order to let everything go. And I think that's a great lesson for life too, because you just can't really plan everything out, can you? So I think Hawkins for life.
It's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't heard how clearly their aesthetic was the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally the same
Yeah.
aesthetic.
Right.
And I
Safety last.
Yeah.
well, but
Right.
I like to play it safe,
Yeah.
and so when I got my big moment.
Do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got my big moment to go out and dance with the other 7 dancers in the 8 cast member. We were doing Heyoka at the time. I'm counting my brains out on stage, and you can't be moving your lips, so my mind is and I'm looking at everybody, and I'm like, this is what I said. I've done all this work, and I can't let go, and I was so terrified because there were so many counts, and I had to be perfect, and I was so disappointed with that first performance, because I was like, if this is what I signed up for, it's no fun, so, but then I had to find, like with time and more time, then you could start, like that falls away, but the first time you went, and I just remember that moment, and it was.
How did you think their mentorship was different?
Erick and Lucy?
Erick and Lucy, because.
Oh, well, they were different.
They were totally.
They were
different.
very different.
I know Erick had a hard time with my humor, but Lucy always.
But Erick loved to laugh.
Yeah, but somehow.
But he had specific things that made him
Made
laugh.
specific things, right?
This is true. And Lucia was just.
Was he hard? She was soft with determination. I got the sense he was hard.
Well, Erick went to Harvard and he knew Latin, so he would always, ask you these big questions, and I would just, some people. Were you one of those students who were like, call on me, and I was always like, don't call on me. And yet he wanted to call on me, and I'm like, oh no, what does da-da-da mean in Latin? And you're just like, I don't know, Erick.
Yeah.
So it was, for me, it's funny, because he was like a father figure, but I can't say that Lucy she was not a mother figure. So that was my relationship with the two of them.
Well, she was a great older sister. I'd call her Mother Earth, perhaps.
I think I mean, she would kind of, but we were friends, you know, I mean, but I know what you mean.
No, we were friends too.
She
I mean-
looked after, she would call me before company class and she'd say, remember, class is a you know, she was trying to help me and looking out for me and looking out for your career, you know, like
Well,
I knew she
looking
was.
at- Yes, I agree.
And that, man, I mean, what an honor to have had both of them as a mentor. I don't think that kids today get to have that kind of mentorship anymore because there are very few modern dance studios that are still with that kind of environment and the mindset anyway. Like, oh, you know, if you said to a dancer today, oh, well, it'll take you 10 years, they would just say, no, I'm not doing that. And time certainly has changed.
Are there companies like that? No?
There are companies, but they don't function like that anymore. They you know, they fly them in, or they're you know,
Right,
they
so
assemble them.
economy.
They're not going to company class every day per se. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't, but all of that kind of time that was put in has definitely shifted in the way that we deal with time today. And I'm glad I didn't experience that. I'm glad that I had to show up every day and listen. You know, Erick would talk 20, 30 minutes of your class and you want to be moving, but no, it was kind of like nice to hear him talk about how someone was walking incorrectly in the sidewalk on his way to come and teach class because he could see it. And I didn't quite kind of get that until I started teaching and watching, and then I was like, oh, I can see that they're not, you know, working this part of their body the way that maybe would be better and help them. You know, you learn, you grow into that. But I had that long mentorship that
I kind of liked all shapes and sizes of dancers. It wasn't like
Yeah,
a type. It was,
right.
He wasn't afraid of light, heavy, or things like that, you know?
Well,
It was like a people's place, you know?
Because, as he would say, it's really the way he tried to do his movement was based on principles of movement, bigger than just his ideas, or he was working with principles. So a principle should work on you and me. It should work on everyone, maybe not equally, but it should work on everyone. So to me, I always feel like his movement is a truth.
His landings knocked me out.
His landings, yeah.
His landings, it was like a light but sure heavy-footedness.
Right, because he
You know,
had
it
so
was-
much lift going. And,
Oh, man.
And yeah.
As a kid growing up in Brooklyn, I really was not too much into dance.
Yes.
That way. And, but when I saw this guy dance, it was, forgive me for this, it was cool. You understand?
It is cool. I agree. That's why I'm
I
doing
was
it.
able to deal with that, you know?
So there's a question, Dove, like you didn't really know me when I brought you the cassette and the score and said, can you do this in a couple of days? And you're like, sure. And then really kind of the next time we saw each other, you played, and I don't even know if you probably so skilled that you were already watching the dance, but I'm just, in your mind, were you thinking, what kind of dance goes with this sound, or did that not even cross
Well,
your-
no, I mean, my first.
I'm asking Dove.
Oh, you have to go like that, you see.
And I'll ask you too.
I mean, I had no idea. I think I didn't have any background with dance and music at that point. So I was kind of, you know, hearing the music, coming from like kind of an improvisation background, I could relate to a lot of the sounds I was hearing, and I could relate to like, you know, the certain amount, I could tell there was like a certain freedom there, even though it was like through composed and really specific. So yeah, I mean, and I guess just, you know, being a part of like experimental art in general. So, you know, the dance part kind of made sense to me, I guess, the first time I saw it. Like, it seemed like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like, here's these sounds, and like, this is the relationship between the dance part and the music part, and that, you know, it kind of made sense. But for a long time, I had no idea what was going on. That's for sure. Like, at
I would
first,
never.
it was like total chaos of just like, how these two things are fitting together. And it was really like what you're talking about, like, better not dwell on what just happened, because you're gonna, that's it, you'll be done, you'll be lost. So it's like you have to really keep moving and just kind of let go of what just happened, just keep going until you basically finish and you're somehow end together, you know?
I know that I was, as the dancer, was just totally interested in technique. Like, I hadn't really experienced dance as an aesthetic thing yet, really. That's how green I was. So, so when I saw the company for the first time, I was like, I don't get how the technique and I couldn't put them together. So I would only imagine, like, thinking of getting so involved in the music and then, like, and what's that, you know, and then how they go together, you know, like, I just, but they do in such in a great way. And what was your experience?
I never thought of it as, I'm really not shocked, but I've never thought of their material as, or them thinking of their material as experimental. I mean, the storylines were so folk most often. It was kind of like, are you familiar with Harry Partch and all those?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Harry Partch thing was involved in the Americana labor movement, the Americana hobo mentality, the Americana experience. When I would see dances like Plains Daybreak or Parson Weems or even Cicada Terrible Freedom, I didn't think I couldn't imagine their thoughts would be that this is experimental.
I don't think they were, I think they knew better than to try to go down that as a, you know.
Right. So why is it that we're talking about experimental?
So, well, I was just saying that, that for me, experiencing just the technique it was hard for me when I encountered the aesthetic. I had to work to sort of put how they go together. And
What was the aesthetic?
well, my dances that I saw were, I guess, Agathon, Heyoka. Those are the ones that I remember. But there was, and what I like about Agathon and Heyoka is they still have this, either the beauty of a southwestern landscape or the beauty of getting a little Native American story of
The Black Lake.
well, and then Black Lake too. I would say that, you know, let's go back to when they really forged together, which is Here and Now with Watchers. When they did that in 1957, it was just two dancers with some screens, and they were constantly changing costume to get on and off to follow each other and then do a duet together. But it was like almost an hour. And I don't think in 1957 there were a lot of hour pieces or hour works being done.
Not so much for modern dance.
For modern dance.
Yes.
And that was I would say that was kind of experimental in asking the audience to sort of,
Sit, yeah.
and then,
And to follow it. And it was not familiar movement either, because at that point, it was either really, you know, Martha Graham, which was very angular, you know, kind of powerful. Sometimes Eric would call it neurotic.
and a storyline. There was
Right.
always some powerful
Mythology.
story.
You know, Eric also had loose stories. I'm thinking about, you know, Lords of Persia and which was the, you know, polo dance, which was not at all
Which, you know, Lincoln
competition.
Kirsten wanted him to do with the New York City Ballet, but Eric would not.
At that point, no, exactly. But, you know, I mean, Eric started with Balanchine and ballet and to get kind of the rigor.
And
the-
Stravinsky.
Exactly. But then with Martha, you know, he was going into the modernist movement,
Absolutely.
but then found, and also he had an injury, and he found that, you know, this physical training may not work for a long-time dance career. And he did show he could dance longer than almost any other male
When did he have the
dancer.
physical injury?
Doing ballet and dancing with Martha,
How
too.
old?
Well, so he was in his 20s in the ballet.
And so you're saying he worked through this technique?
He actually went to
that.
see, or started getting involved in kinesiology, and that sort of opened a whole nother door to him about how the body could be maybe used in a more efficient,
that's wild.
less injurious way. And he said, well, that's what I want to do.
And what was this less injurious way?
His technique.
I understand, but what about the technique was a
Well,
less-
you don't do things that are going to injure the body, and you find a way to move with effortlessness and flow, and you have the lift going at all the time, so when you do those fabulous landings from a jump, you know how to land so that you don't hurt yourself. And
Still all core related.
Yes.
It's all correlated.
all
And
correlated.
highly trained. I mean, the thing is, it's the technical training behind getting that kind of effortlessness, which is actually a ton of effort.
And this is where the classes went?
Yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
never understood that.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying, when
It's
it
so
was such a
specific,
big
yeah.
Right.
shift to go
Hardest
from,
thing ever.
I was so happy with the technique, and then I'm like, and then what about this aesthetic? And as I said, it was, I had danced since I was 5, but I had really not encountered modern dance. I had done, bad ballet, but it was, we had a good time doing it. And so this was my first, I studied design. I used to go to the museums and look at the paintings, but I had never sort of crossed that over into, okay, now we're gonna make an abstract expressionist type painting. Now we're gonna make sort of a modernist, abstract expressionist type dance. Not that they would ever think that that's what they were doing, but this is when they were living in New York, when that was going on. That was the big, de Kooning, Motherwell, were all friends of theirs. They hung out together at the 5 Spot. They influenced each other. I mean, Lucy she was very close with Motherwell and de Kooning as well, and they talked about all these ideas, and Erick championed, as well as live music, design, which is also really cool. So he worked with Louise Bourgeois. He worked with Helen Frankenthaler. So not only did he commission
I
composers, he
forgot
commissioned
about-
artists.
I totally forgot about Helen.
Yeah, who was married to Motherwell at the time.
Oh, man.
So, and the abstract painters are the ones who gave Lucia her first concert, as you know, at the 5. They're the ones that said, hey, your turn.
Yeah.
You need to get up there.
Ralph D'Orazio.
And then we have the beautiful Ralph D'Orazio,
I
who,
just found out that they were an item.
You didn't know
I
that?
didn't know that. No, I
you
would
gotta-
call up Ralph and I would say, Jesus, Ralph, what's happening?
We need to brush up on the
And
gossip.
he's made, for Cantilever now, which you'll see, he's made a beautiful sculpture that is the set. And he made sets throughout Erick and Lucy's career. Also,
And
His
of course,
aesthetic.
he, to her specifications, created over 100 instruments.
This is
for
true.
Percussion, so,
Yeah.
Oh,
you
so
know,
a
the
lot of
ladder,
stuff
harp.
that
Ralph
was
made
blowing
them.
on Ralph made.
Wait, I didn't know Ralph made instruments.
I didn't know that.
those wooden
And they look
drums
very
and-
sculpted.
Oh, yeah, all that
Yeah,
stuff.
they're
I was
all
wondering
like
how she
beautiful
came
pieces of
about
art.
that. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Far out.
So, and
Yeah.
if she wanted a glass ladder harp, I can make that for you. And he'd go out and he'd buy the glass tubes and
God,
he'd,
amazing.
the wood, and he'd
His
pull
studio.
it together and, he'd
man.
make them for her.
That's special.
Yeah.
That's special.
All with that same aesthetic and sensation and, very interesting quality that bridges classical and contemporary into something dangerously soft.
And so also, Erick had, I'm sure shared his ideas with Ralph for sets, but the big problem with the sets is they have to be able to break down and travel in these black boxes. So if Ralph had we've put these sets together now, and Ralph had a very specific, like the red dot matched up with the red, you don't get instructions of how to put it together, you just figure out his system, and he had a system. And I can remember Erick saying to me, you gotta have a system, Katherine. As I'm sitting there doing the books after rehearsal, and he's like, and that movement you did in rehearsal was beautiful. but you gotta have a system, you know, I'm sitting there doing the books for the, but it is, that's thinking it out and creating a system that makes it kind of universal so we can all find our way through it. And another reason why it's living on, because it's so well thought out.
You're saying the vision was extreme. When I think of myself, I think of muddy vision. But you're saying their vision had that clarity.
I feel it did. I feel they were aiming for clarity in the body. I think they were aiming for clarity in the timbre. I will just say timbre, not necessarily sound or music. I know Lucy was, that was her specialty. And then how to put that all together in a way that had that aliveness and that immediacy that would have that effect when the audience encountered it. Was they cared about that.
You know, it's so funny because I remember one of the first tours I did with them, we were at the University of Michigan, something like that. And we were waiting for them. They drove. We flew. And they pulled up in like this big station wagon.
The station wagon, yes.
Big station wagon. And Eric is dressed in this seersucker suit with the straw hat.
Yes.
Lucy looks like Mark Kettle next to him, man. It was like Norman Rockwell, man, these guys. And that knocked me out so because of these crazy, dramatic people. You remember images like that?
Oh, yeah.
Characters.
Always
Yeah, so that's why I question whether the image, whether the vision was so clear because there was such a dichotomy.
Yeah, well, but I think to them, art was very different than life.
Than life.
Absolutely,
Yeah, right.
and they.
That's what I learned that day.
And while they did life well, I think they did art, like they dove in 100,000%, and didn't copy any, it's all original thought, you know. And they wanted, I don't think you can really create something new, but I think all of the modern dance icons at that time were trying to make their, what's my vision, what's my voice, and a lot of it was done through music. And so Lucy and Erick left Martha, which was like huge, so he had to find himself again. And they together found this
Did he and
intensity.
Martha communicate after that?
Oh, yeah.
They did.
Yeah, but I think we found now in all this that Erick had to go to Mexico to get the divorce from Martha because she wouldn't give it to him. And Lucy demanded that he get divorced, I think. So they could get married secretly. No one knew. I was talking to someone who, with knew Mother well, and he said, you know, he knew them a while ago. I thought they were together, but no one knew that they were, you know. And I said, well, I think professionally they just wanted to both be, you know, artists on their own and not present as a married couple. So, yeah.
Yes. I would love to interject a question here and talk to Dove and David about how do you feel about playing for dance? Because in my experience, a lot of times the musicians are like, you know, I don't want to be in a pit band and I don't want to, and they feel as though it's not really the collaboration that I think we as dancers feel, that it's really important to not just have a national, you know, a symphony playing for you and whatever. So I'm just curious about that. And if you feel that, in fact, if you have a good night, you're really buoying up the dancers, that there's a communication there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've, you know, yeah, so it's like all the times I've kind of played with the Hawkins Company, except for one time has been solo. So I've, you know, it's just been me and then the dancers. And I guess I've always felt like from the very first time that it was a communication between us, you know, and it just kind of like what it feels like to play in an ensemble. Same thing, like communication through art, basically. And so, yeah, I mean, because otherwise, like I realized instantly that it's like if there was no, if I wasn't communicating with them and they're not communicating with me, that's like, it just doesn't work. Like, at least with this, the Hawkins and this music. And so, I always, I mean, it's just, I learned a lot. I mean, and still am learning just about even like, I see a movement and it's like, I would think, I relate to it a certain way in terms of like how I would feel the rhythm of that, and then Katherine counts me through the particular thing, and it's like very different than what I realized, and just learning how they, feel it and how they breathe with it, and then how that relates to like the music I'm playing and how I'm breathing with this music that I'm playing. So it really it's always felt very much of a communication thing to me, and I don't know if that's, I mean, I think that is what they had intended, it seems like. It's like both of these, the dance and the music and the sets, it's like all of this is being kind of combined equally. And, all three of those things are, equally important. So, what do you think, Dave?
Well, I had never been around intense people like Erick and Lucy. And I'm a sweat guy. I like to sweat when I play. And I remember some of those dress rehearsals, man, with Erick tearing everybody a new you-know-what if the stuff wasn't right. And although the counting of the company was oftentimes much different than the actual scoring of the music,
Yes.
there were definite cues you had to make, and you did not want to miss a cue with Erick around. And that intensity was a life musical lesson for me. If you're going to do something, you do it. And it wasn't an accompanying thing. It was a matter of you're on, just as the dancers are on, And that was such an important life lesson to me. I'm very lucky. I'm able to continue that intensity, And if you knew a dancer was injured, and you knew the dancer was going ahead with it anyway, that was a very heavy thing for me. You think sometimes of these skiers, who was the famous woman who did the Olympic thing where she had a broken leg or something like that? Yes. These people, man, I saw their feet. Woof. You guys got some feet, let me tell you.
And we got some stamina, right? So when you became conductor, how did as my musical director, did anything change, or did something come different to you?
Yes, my obligation to you was different than my obligation would have been to Erick and Lucia. Your intensity was the same intensity, but you had learned from the past and they hadn't.
Right.
So there was a certain I'm sorry, my English. There was a certain compatibility I found with you that wouldn't be the same if it was Erick.
Right.
My intensity was the same. I wanted to be right for you because I wanted you to be able to express yourself. But with Erick, there was fear.
I had that fear a little bit. I mean, he could go there.
I mean, I joked with him. I always put him on the spot.
Other people didn't have, he could laugh, but I had that sort of, I guess I had so much respect for him.
Well, I knew Lucia liked me so much, I think he was just putting up with me.
I felt the same way. I kind of felt the same
That's
way.
the truth. I mean, like, I would kind of jive him, and he would strike back, and I would love it, But I got the feeling I was kidding and he was serious, that kind of a thing. I remember once we flew up to Maine. I wanted to do this gig in Maine, but in order to get there in time, I was in a 2-seater or 4-seater airplane, man, and Lucy knew I was doing that. And I was with this guy, John Moses, and he was so scared because the weather was weird. And we got to the rehearsal in Maine, Bar Harbor, Maine, like 10, 20 minutes late, you understand?
Yes.
So I remember my cracked Erick when when he was kind of angry with me, was that, I said, you should have sent a chauffeur limousine to get me. And he said, yeah, I would send you an ambulance to get you. It was that kind of a thing. But he was serious.
I know.
But I was just trying to jive with him a little bit. Or I would crack some jokes, and Lucy always forgave me. And he just would look at Lucy and move on, that kind of. But you guys wouldn't do that, right? The
Well,
dancers?
I think, I cared about the work so much, so sometimes I feel like maybe I was too careful, but I was trying to be very careful to represent these incredible artists correctly. But I remember when we were doing the show at the Rose in Lincoln Center, and I was switching back and forth because I was playing tambourine piano for a new piece that we did,
right?
and then I had to come back and go back on as dancer. And I said, Dave, do you think it'd be okay if I just walk on and play the piano barefoot? And you're like, yeah, I think that would be awesome. Because then I didn't have to put my shoes on and walk over and play and then go back and put.
No, I thought that was
like,
so, I
thank
thought
you.
that was so in the mode, the experimental, it's got to be done, you know?
And show those feet.
And
those
show
feet,
those
that's right.
feet.
Look at these feet.
That's
Well,
And
no,
not
I mean,
make that awkward noise.
No, it's helped me. I
You
hurt
know?
my chops, like last night, my chops, I mean, I would imagine your injuries are recurring. Now, do you have injuries?
Not really, but.
My injuries are recurring, you know?
Yeah,
And,
they come
and
back.
I think
Eternal.
they come back. And they're there psychologically.
Mine never go away.
Right, that's,
Yeah.
well, I mean, if I go with, no, I feel pressure on a specific part of my lip. And that was since 1984, 85, you
Yeah.
know? Of course, it's a lot of it's psychological, you know, when you injure yourself. I would
Yes.
imagine dancers go through that, right?
Oh,
Yes.
big
I
time.
mean, you put yourself totally out at the
Yeah.
performance, but leading up to the performance, you're aware that you could do some harm.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you get around that?
Adrenaline is the best drug.
Adrenaline,
Yeah.
right.
And it's free.
Yeah. So this is, so in that sense, even being around the dancers has helped me survive kind
Yeah.
of these kinds of things, you
We'll
know.
do anything to get up there.
Well, that's actually, did you get nervous still? Because they were very nervous. Eric was nuts.
I get nervous, but I've tried to learn from not letting the nerves take away from all the work that I just did the last 3 months.
That's how I felt last
For that
night.
little tiny bit on stage, you gotta if you lose your balance, you just lose your balance and make that a beautiful moment, like, oh, that was part
That's
of it. And
Was
and
he
part of it.
understanding of this?
That's right.
He talked about
That's
this
it.
in class. And again, like these things, he would say them and they didn't quite line up for me. So there was an entrance that he would say a dancer did, and she came out from the wing and she slipped and she fell down. So then her choice was to go back off and come out and slip and fall down on purpose again to make it look like the first one wasn't. And I was like, okay, that's one way to handle it.
No, that's a heavy improvisatory
Yeah.
technique,
But-
you know? right?
Definitely.
To make it.
Yeah, you just play it
But
again.
Eric talked about that in, technique class, and I was
That's
like, okay.
beautiful, man.
Okay.
Yeah. that-
And now the other thing that
What
a
would
lot
he-
of,
What would he do?
he would probably have you dying laughing. He was such a ham. He could do anything.
Right. But I'm saying, would he restart to further embed, or would he continue and cover as he continued?
I think he was saying that you make that mistake look intentional.
Right.
Absolutely, that's the way to go. So what
And it's not an audience pander, it's an audience confidence builder,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was more like to just not look like you made a mistake, to
Right.
make it
Right.
look like.
You don't want your
this.
audience nervous
Yeah,
or, right.
And you don't want them to know that, or think, oh, he must have fallen, or he fell, poor guy. Like you don't want to.
Well, because there are certain techniques, like with the circus tightrope people, or even
Mm-hmm.
improvisers, where you want to make your audience understand how difficult it is what you're doing.
I don't think,
And then this is the
I don't
opposite.
think they
That
want
wasn't his
that.
trip,
This
no.
is difficult, but you don't want it to make it look difficult. I don't know. I think
And
it's
you
opposite.
apply all these things? Now is the second generation? or
Yes,
third generation?
indeed. Yeah, I mean, I remember actually, one of the first things that Katherine taught me about was, sensation. And just that word, the quality of sensation, like if you don't have that sensation in your body, then you can't make the audience feel it. And Erick wanted the audience to feel, if I'm correct, what it's like to be able to move that way. So if you're going to invite them in and you want your audience to trust you, if you come out there doing rhythmic gymnastics, it's wow, but that wow lasts for about 5 seconds, but we want the longevity of we got to draw that wow out, and in order to do that, there needs to be that balance of fluidity and intensity, and then so you have to be nice to the air molecules around you, and that was something that was very new because I actually was in the circus, not on the tightrope, but I was in Ringling Brothers, which no longer exists, as a showgirl. Thank you very much.
Whoa, don't pass over that.
Oh.
So what was your function?
This.
Right,
And
you
so
did that very well.
thank you. And my primary training is in the technique of Lester Horton, which is very physical, very athletic, highly demanding, but it is what it is, and that's what you see. So which is very exciting and beautiful and generous and open, but with Hawkins, you have all of that physicality, but the wow factor is like, it's almost like a hidden treasure. And I never got to experience that before. So now that I teach, I actually use Hawkins philosophy to teach other techniques, and the dancers are able to relate in a much more efficient way, physically, emotionally, intellectually. And I love it, and it is what I have done the longest, and I knew that when I first met you, also because I like hanging with you, but I've been doing this for 27 years, and I knew when I first started, I'm like, this is gonna last, because I will never master it, I will never achieve perfection, and I love that. Because I'm afraid of boredom anyway, but also because it's scary. There's always something new to discover, and exploring this work. It's amazing how much deeper you can go. It never stops, and I love it.
Do you have a fave?
A fave piece?
A fave piece?
I think my fave piece. It switches back and forth, but right now I've got to say it's Cantilever. Because I've been able to do so many different versions of it, and now seeing it from the other side, and it's like between the set and Lucy's score and the
Lucy's score
choreography.
is brilliant.
It is brilliant. Yeah, and I learn more about it each time I do it.
I
so.
love playing that piece every
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
That's what we have to look at, all these notes which exist.
yes.
But so I always go, oh, I missed that the last time. How
Right.
did it?
There's
it like,
always
because it's so much, and it's like I'm
Yeah.
like, how did I miss that? But there's so much. It's like, oh, that's probably how you missed that one count or that one mantra. That's or oh, this is. But it's so like the spacing. And the counts and the mantras or subdivisions of each meter are all there, and then you have dynamics and sensation. We talked about spacing. These are all things that Lucia, which is what is really how I learned this. She taught composition, which I just took with her over and over and over again. And what I loved about it.
How would she do that?
Well, what I loved about it is that. She was a musician, so she said, why can't dance have all of the, because there's music schools everywhere. There weren't dance schools everywhere. I mean, there are more now, but it was like going to architecture school, learning the way that she taught composition for dance, and no one teaches it in that fashion. But you had to learn, the first thing you had to learn was time, and you had to learn You know, because you're going to be very conscious when you're dancing. You're going to know your time, and then you can make it more exciting by knowing your subdivisions or your mantras. And it was, if the movement, I never knew a movement could be a 15, or it could be an 11, or it could be a 3, or it could be a 1. You know, I never knew that, you know, and it was like when I first started watching it, it was like watching something that was invisible, and then all these people were saying, oh yeah, that's a 5, and I'm like, what are you talking about? But in order to make those delineations, then you have to say, well, the 5 starts here on the 1 and ends on the 5, and then the next meter starts here on the 1. You know, like you start having all these tools to define or delineate your movement, and that is super cool and super exciting, but you have to really think about it. It's not automatic. And then you add dynamics, which is something that is in music, like, I mean, why can't we do like a 5, p, 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 or f, 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 you know, like, and to some
How would
extent,
you do
well,
5 p, p,
well,
p,
to
p,
some
p?
extent, well, so she divided, this is very cool, she would, so there was a neutral, kind of like a timeline, there was a neutral, and then there's strong to the 1, strong to the 2, strong to the 3, strong to the 4, strong to the, and you could be really fancy and go all the way to strong to the 10, and then same thing, delicate to the 1, delicate to the 2, 3. So you thought about, and dynamics to a certain extent in movement is how much energy you do it with, you know, as how much energy you put into the, so, and then you had Erick reading Ziami, the no drama director, saying that if you want to do a 10 on stage, you have to perform it in performance as a 7, because if you do it as a 10, it'll get thrown away.
Oh, that's so far out, because sometimes I exaggerate for just those reasons. Sometimes when you're playing a line, you have to overdo the line for the audience to have the subtlety. It's the same situation.
Well, I was watching last night at the show, because I was there, and I thought it was very interesting that musicians, all of them are very experienced, obviously. They've learned that when they're on, they can't just play the sound. They're like, you're like, oh, that's, you know, the oboist was very good at, you know, she didn't do a lot, but she, you know, it wasn't like she was just playing the sound. She was, and the pianist, when she was, you know, she would, it wasn't, you know, you could do that too. She you could see her whole body, all mask, of course, but
I can't figure that out.
they got that movement going because I'm playing now. I think it's healthy that they're moving like that.
Very healthy, and that's not really how many of the orchestral players approach it.
They're very still.
stiff.
Which is always my problem. Forgive me, musicians, with music, is that it is so boring for me to watch.
Yeah, well, that's my problem with dancers.
It's too boring. Fabulous music needs dance. I don't want to see you up there unless you have this going on or something going on. It's very boring, and I need movement.
But you know, it's interesting, when you were talking
Yeah,
about,
aliveness.
Alive.
when you talk about the 1
Immediacy.
to 10, or the 1 to 5, or
Yes.
the 1 to 3, and you don't go out there to get the audience right away, you let it go. I read books about comedy and drama and stuff like that. I was reading a book of Steve Martin's, and he was he was telling the young comedians that the audience doesn't have to laugh to trigger that they understand the joke. They will take that home, and they will think it through.
Oh, that's cool.
And they understand the laugh from inside. I would imagine that's a similar.
Oh, yeah,
pattern,
absolutely.
you know?
Well, I think, for example, these kids have been amazing at George Washington
Yeah.
University, but they have no idea, and that, you know, like 10 years, 20 years down, they're going to go, wow. And maybe if they look at a video of themselves, they're going to go, wow.
And what is that? Wow.
This is what we're here talking
They're
about.
The
evolving. I
subtlety
think
of
they're
what we're
evolving.
doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you come to the show, I'm just, like, there's a lot of student work, which is very interesting and very now. But then, you know, this piece was made in 1963, and it just, the feel and the look that it has. And even, I was talking with the lighting, setting the lights, I said, oh, very slow, like the sun rising, like the sun coming into your room, waking you up, like we want some magic there. And he's like, are you sure the audience isn't gonna think it's a mistake? And I'm like, no, they're not. Because he's so used to
Yeah, of course. Boom,
and
boom,
this
boom, boom,
this
boom.
has
Right.
this just has a language. It exists in its own way, and that's what I'm talking about. That they will realize that they stepped into that, did it, made it happen, and it's very evident if once they think about it or they look at it, that it's something different.
They're transporting audiences.
So you're not worried about, because like when I teach, I often think that I'm saying things that they will know 5, 10 years from now. It's not an immediate response.
Yeah,
So you're aware of that when you're talking.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. It is a little scary, but
scary,
we like
yeah.
a little bit of scariness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because the immediacy, it's there, but then it's gone.
And that's how Eric taught?
I never got to work with Erick personally, but I imagine.
I mean, Eric was so matter of fact. I mean, that and just know. It was just, it's almost like, how do you make it so clean and so uncomplicated? That's really not easy, and I had to get used to that, and that was actually sometimes hard for me, and just the you had to wear a black leotard, and we had a specific way we were in class, and we go across the floor, and he's watching you, and then when he makes his comment to you, it's in front of everyone, and that's all very powerful when you're forming.
I was always impressed by how seriously all the dancers took those classes.
They
didn't miss classes.
Yeah,
And
well, I think they just had such a high regard for Eric, and that was really evident.
I know with Lucia, she knew what but I don't know if Eric was this way, Lucia knew what had to be done in business, but really rarely took the route that she knew that she could. When she was writing for me, she recommended, I mentioned this to you the other day, she recommended I go to composers like Charles Warner and people like that because it would be good for my career.
Exactly.
And I got the sense that they opted not to do those things often.
I think we've found evidence that I know Lucy, she did their publicity. I don't think they trusted anyone else to do their, not that she had the time or energy, but she did, and she wanted it done a certain way, and they would send letters to critics, just to sort of help them have a vocabulary for what they were getting ready to see. And so that they could talk about it in the Times or the paper, hopefully intelligently, or maybe get some of their ideas across.
And one of the other things we discovered when Lucy's materials finally did come to us, and we had 47 shipping crates of stuff, papers from her apartment. After Eric died in 1994, and she moved into a much stronger leadership role in the company, eventually to be both resident composer and artistic director, she was clipping out of the New York Times everything that wasn't Hawkins. Their ads, the reviews, it was pretty clear, both music and dance, and art as well. It was really like, how can I position this company now that we've lost the founder? Because that's always a big problem with the succession planning of a dance company when it's been such a strong personality. How do I step into this? How do I lead them out of it? And of course, we don't know what the answer would have been because she didn't live to see it. But she must have been spending every waking hour trying to figure out what it was and what they were doing to get attention, and then also these notes to the critics as well. Using something in their review and then shaping it with more information to give them more context and philosophy.
She
and
introduced me
this-
to Leighton Kerner. You remember Leighton Kerner from the Village Voice? He was one of those critics who was a helpful person. And she actually dragged him or I into his company, and he wrote a whole page about I mean, she knew how to do
She
it.
had that sense. I think she was trying to do 3 or more jobs. And, without the infrastructure and other staff support and having been in the nonprofit sector for a while before I have this wonderful job, I can say that, yes, you can end up, exhausting yourself. And I think she did. But with so much joy, too. There is so much joy that's also there in the creativity. So I hope if you want to add a final word, any of you, it's been really such a treat to hear you exchange thoughts and remembrances of Lucy and Erick, who were such an incredible artist power couple. And I treasure that you were here to celebrate that we can make this collection available now. And I hope that all of you who are watching will come and visit and see some of these materials. Think about where you might be hearing the music or seeing the dances again, because I am seeing that there's a great interest, especially because Lucia had not published her music. Erick didn't want to pay royalties for dancing to her music. And so now we're getting outreach from ensembles that are excited to have the chance to visit her music and bring her back into the spotlight. But thank you very much, Dove and David and Katherine and Kristina, and thank you for joining us with our conversation today.